Chapter 5. The City That Could No Longer Breathe. 1863. The air in New York smelled of smoke, blood, and medicinal alcohol. From the port, the heavy vapors of the East River rose over the cramped tenements of 5 Points, where thousands of families lived piled on top of each other, in lightless rooms, among rats and the dry cough of the consumptive. In the streets, barefoot children ran between carriages, selling newspapers or cigarettes, while women washed laundry in cast iron tubs, waving away the clouds of steam. The smell of chloride of lime used for disinfection mixed with the heavy stench of the sewers. Every corner of the city seemed a mix of fever and hope. In the hospitals, improvised in schools, churches, and even old meat markets, doctors wore gauze masks, and young seminarians read prayers for the sick laid out in endless rows. The lucky ones died quickly. The others faded slowly, their gaze lost on the moldy ceiling. Every morning, the city's carts collected the dead from the night. Some days there were dozens, others hundreds. The count was no longer kept. People had become accustomed to going to St. Patrick's Church not just for service, but to request death certificates. In the places where Irish immigrants lived, such as the McCarty family, men worked on the docks or construction sites, risking their lives not from disease, but from exhaustion or an accident. Women sewed, washed, baked bread, or prayed not to cough too hard, for a long cough almost certainly meant an imminent end. Alarm bells rang continuously, blending with the screams of the crowd. On the streets of Manhattan, barefoot men, workers with cracked hands, women wearing headscarves, wet with sweat, passed the same word from mouth to mouth. Injustice! In a wretched apartment, on the second floor of a peeling building, Patrick McCarty sat at a table with a piece of paper in his hand. It was a conscription notice, the Union seal imprinted in black ink, with his name misspelled. They were calling him to war. On the corner of the table, a candle flickered tremulously, illuminating the face of the woman watching him in silence. Catherine, pale, coughed into a handkerchief hidden in her lap. She knew she couldn't stop him, but she couldn't let him leave without saying something. Pat, if you go, who will keep our home? God, Kate, he said softly, without lifting his gaze. Or luck. Whichever we catch first. In a corner of the room, 2 boys stood motionless. Joseph, the older one, was about 7 or 8 and kept his dirty hands on his knees. He already worked at the port, hauling sacks and ropes, for a few cents a day. Henry, the younger one, had just turned 4. He looked at his father with a strange seriousness, as if he understood that something was breaking forever that evening. In the street, voices and a fighting song set to the rhythm of drums could be heard. Down with the draft! Down with Lincoln! The people shouted. Hundreds of workers, Irish and black alike, spoke of injustice. The rich could pay $300 to avoid going to war. The poor, however, were sent to their deaths. Patrick suddenly rose, crumpling the conscription notice in his large, powerful fist. $300. That's our life, Kate. For them, 300. For us, the coffin. The workers streamed into the street, pushing past each other, their clothes wet and their faces black with soot. In their hands, a few coins rattled, the sweetest sound to a hungry man. Joseph McCarty, in oversized trousers and a torn shirt, counted his money as he walked. 5 cents. That's all he got for a whole day of hauling sacks and pulling ropes. He felt them heavy in his pocket, as if they were gold. Not because they were worth much, but because those coins were everything he had. On his way, he passed the school of the rich neighborhood boys. Through the large windows, their voices could be heard reciting, laughing. He looked at them for just a moment, then lowered his eyes. He knew his place was elsewhere, on the docks, not in a school desk. In the evening, when he got home, he told his mother, "They didn't need me today, Mom." And she stroked his cheek, unsuspecting. She thought her boy had been turned away from work again. But Joseph was lying because he had a plan. Since his father had received the conscription paper, the boy had set his mind on one thing: to save $300. 300 that meant life. 300 that could buy a man's freedom. Every day on the pier, he saw those returning from the war. Maimed men, walking on crutches, screaming in pain or sick with sorrow. They walked slowly, in columns, their gaze lost. Their smell of hospital and death mixed with that of tar and algae. Joseph watched them with a silence that both elevated and shattered him. "That's how Dad will be," he thought, "if I don't do something." And then he tightened his small fist in his pocket, where he had hidden the coins. He was just a child, but in his heart the struggle of a grown man was being born. Night descended over the port like a blanket of smoke. The cries of gulls mingled with the metallic clanging of chains, and somewhere far away, a ship whistled in the darkness. The next day Joseph walked slowly, limping. His shirt was torn, and a streak of dried blood marked his cheek. He had nothing left in his pockets. He had lost all his money. All the days of work. All the hope. He had saved cent by cent for 2 weeks. He had gambled them away, desperate, at a clandestine gambling den hidden in a warehouse behind the docks. The older boys had let him believe he had a chance, then they mocked him, took everything, and beat him until he learned his lesson. When he got home, Henry was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a wooden horse. "Joe, what's wrong with you?" The older boy wiped his face with his sleeve and whispered, "I saved money to buy our father's life, but I lost it." Henry said nothing. He just approached and touched his scratched hand. From the next room, Catherine had heard everything. Her cough betrayed her when she entered the room, leaning against the wall. "What did you say, Joseph?" Then he burst out. He told her everything, how he had hidden the money from her, how he had worked until he bled, how he had lost everything. Catherine was silent. Tears slid soundlessly down her face, and behind her, the door opened. Standing in the doorway was Patrick McCarty, in his worn coat and hands still dirty with soot from work. His gaze darkened, but not towards the son who had erred, but towards the world that had made him believe a child had to save his father with gambling money. He clenched the conscription paper in his large, strong fist. "Enough." Then he turned to Catherine and said with a sharp calm, "If Lincoln wants a soldier, he'll have one." That night, Patrick went out into the street. On the corner, near the port, the men were already gathering, workers, longshoremen, factory boys, their faces burning with rage. They spoke of revolt, of blood, of justice. The smoke and shouts mingled with the church bells. It was the beginning of the New York draft riots. The longshoreman Patrick McCarty had his shirt unbuttoned at the neck and the look of a man who no longer expected salvation from anyone. In one hand he held a club, in the other a clumsily written sign. "I don't need your civil war." He was not a political agitator, but a man driven by despair. He had worked for years on the docks, swallowing dust, steam, and promises. When the government told him he had to go to war, or pay $300 he didn't have, something broke inside him. On the smoke-filled streets, Patrick spoke to the crowd. "We work, they send us to die. And the rich buy their lives with gold. Is this the land of the free?" The crowd answered with screams. Dozens of people gathered around him, following him towards the draft office on 3rd Avenue. When they arrived, the soldiers were already waiting. A shower of stones rose from the crowd, and in a few moments the windows were shattered and the doors ripped off their hinges. Then the first shot was heard. A Federal soldier, young and frightened, fired into the air. But the second bullet didn't go to the sky, it went into Patrick's chest. He staggered, looked up at the whitish sky, and then collapsed onto the cobblestones. The crowd broke into screams. Catherine found out later, when a neighbor came to the door, his clothes stained with blood. "They shot him. Patrick, he was at the front, shouting for everyone." That night, the poor neighborhoods burned. The light of the fires reflected in the eyes of little Henry, who watched from the window, unable to understand why the world was collapsing. Catherine pulled him away from the glass, but he managed to see one more torch thrown into the air, like a red star, falling onto a building. Hundreds of people had taken to the streets, furious that the rich could pay to avoid the war, while the poor, Irish immigrants or German workers, were sent to the front in their place. Houses were set on fire, soldiers were sent to shoot into the crowd. For several days, the shouts and gunshots drowned out both the noise of the carriages and the crying of the sick. That night, New York was a single body, wounded, furious, and bloodied. From the street, the bells of the carts carrying the dead to the battery could be heard. The carts passed all night, without stopping. In the morning, Patrick's body was taken in a cart, along with other dead, to the Catholic cemetery on the outskirts of Manhattan. No priest held a service for him. Only a woman threw a dry flower over him. Catherine watched in silence, holding her son's hands. In Henry's eyes, a strange sadness was already visible. "Mom, is he sleeping?" Catherine didn't answer immediately. She pulled him to her chest, pressing his head against her tear-soaked dress. "Yes, my dear. He's sleeping, and he will never wake up again." That night, Catherine lit a candle in the window, a sign that a man had passed away in that house. On their street, candles were already burning in almost every window.